October 1945, Camp McCoy, Wisconsin. A Japanese woman stared at the golden corn cob in her hand and whispered four words that would haunt her forever. "This is pig food." 30 seconds later, she took a bite, and everything she had been taught about America shattered. The autumn wind cut through the barbed wire fence like a blade. Keiko Tanaka stood in line with 11 other Japanese women, their Navy uniforms still bearing the salt stains of the Pacific crossing. They had expected torture chambers. They had expected starvation. They had expected the demons their propaganda films had promised. What they got instead was something far more confusing. Clean barracks, hot showers, and corn on the cob with butter. Keiko was 26 years old. She had been an Imperial Navy nurse stationed at the Okinawa Naval Hospital until the Americans came with their bombs and their ships and their impossible firepower. Her father had died in an American air raid on Shizuoka, buried under the rubble of his own rice fields. Her fiancé, Lieutenant Hiroshi Yamamoto, had committed seppuku rather than face the shame of surrender. He had left her a letter. "If I fall, Keiko, die with honor. Never surrender. Never forget you are Japanese." But she had surrendered. And now she stood in Wisconsin, thousands of miles from home, holding a tray of food that made no sense. The mess hall smelled like butter and smoke and something sweet she could not identify. American soldiers moved through the space with casual confidence, laughing, eating, living, as if the war had never touched them at all. The abundance was obscene. Keiko had watched men die for a handful of rice. She had performed surgery by candlelight while shells fell around her. She had not seen this much food in one place since before the war began. And on her tray, alongside mashed potatoes and beef stew and green beans, sat 2 ears of corn. Golden, glistening, dripping with melted butter. Keiko froze. Corn, tomorokoshi, the food her father had grown for pigs. Behind her, Yuki Nakamura whispered in Japanese, "Keiko-san is that corn." Like for animals. Yuki was 22, a communications clerk from Tokyo middle-class family, wide-eyed and curious even in captivity. She looked at the corn with more confusion than disgust, trying to understand why their captors would serve livestock feed. Keiko nodded slowly, her stomach twisted. In Shizuoka, corn had been animal feed, dried and chopped for livestock. Never grilled, never eaten whole, never touched by human hands except to throw it into troughs for swine. Lieutenant Kazue Mori stood abruptly at a nearby table. She was 35, the daughter of an imperial officer, and she had not bent even slightly since their capture. Her voice cut through the mess hall in sharp Japanese. "They mock us, feeding prisoners the food of swine. This is the American mercy they promised." Several women set down their trays. Keiko felt the weight of their eyes, waiting, watching to see what she would do. At the serving line, an American soldier noticed their hesitation. He was tall, maybe 28, with the weathered face of someone who had spent his life working outdoors. His name tag read Jensen. He picked up an ear of corn, held it high, and took an enormous theatrical bite. Butter dripped down his chin. He grinned at them with genuine warmth, not mockery, just simple farm boy enthusiasm. "Best damn corn in Wisconsin, ladies. My family has been growing this for 3 generations." Keiko felt white-hot rage flood through her chest. He was laughing at them, showing them they were lower than animals. This was the cruelty they had been warned about. The casual American brutality disguised as kindness. But then Sergeant Jensen did something unexpected. He set down salt, pepper, and extra butter on their table. He pulled a small card from his pocket and read slowly in broken, carefully practiced Japanese. "Oishii desu. Tabete kudasai. Watashi no kazoku no tochikara. It is delicious. Please eat. From my family's land." His pronunciation was terrible. His grammar worse. But his eyes were earnest, not mocking, not cruel, just trying to communicate across an impossible divide. Keiko's world tilted slightly on its axis. An American trying to speak Japanese, with kindness in his voice. What kind of psychological torture was this? If you or your father served in World War II, you know the sacrifices of the greatest generation. This is a story about what happened after the guns stopped, when enemies had to become human beings again. It is about corn, yes, but it is really about whether mercy can defeat propaganda. Stay until the end, because what these women discovered changed not just their lives, but the entire future of American and Japanese relations. If you remember the 1940s or had family who served, let us know in the comments. We want to hear your stories too. 3 months earlier, Bobby Jensen had been standing in his mother's kitchen in Iowa holding a telegram. We regret to inform you that Private Thomas Jensen has been killed in action at Guadalcanal. His mother had collapsed against the table, her whole body shaking with sobs Bobby could do nothing to stop. He had held her for an hour while she cried for his younger brother, for Tommy, who had been 19 and stupid and brave, and was now buried somewhere in the Pacific. When she finally spoke, her voice had been raw. Bobby promised me something. When this war ends, you will not let hate win. Your brother died fighting. Do not you die hating. Promise me. Ma, they killed Tommy. How can I? Because that is what makes us Americans, son. We fight when we must. We forgive when we can. Promise. He had promised. And now 3 months later, he stood in a Wisconsin POW camp trying to keep that promise while looking at Japanese women in Navy uniforms. Women who might have nursed the soldiers who killed his brother. Women who represented everything he had been taught to hate. But he had made a promise to his mother. And Bobby Jensen kept his promises. The mess hall had gone quiet. 12 Japanese women sat at their tables, corn untouched, tension radiating from every rigid spine. Lieutenant Maury glared at anyone who even looked at their food. No one touches the American pig food. We are not animals. Keiko stared at the corn. Her stomach growled audibly. She had not had a full meal in weeks. The ship crossing had been adequate but sparse. Before that, Okinawa had been starvation and chaos, and watching soldiers die for lack of supplies, while American planes dropped bombs with casual abundance. Across the table, Hana Yoshida watched with calm, maternal eyes. She was 31, a widow whose husband had died at Iwo Jima, a mother of 2 children she had not seen in 8 months. Her hands were steady as she reached for her corn. Hana spoke quietly but firmly. I will eat first. If it is poison, the rest of you refuse. If I survive, you know it is safe. Lieutenant Maury protested. Hana-san, you dishonor. Hana cut her off with a look that could have stopped artillery fire. I dishonor nothing. I have 2 children in Osaka who need their mother alive. I will not die of starvation to prove a point to a cob of corn. She picked up the corn with both hands, traditional Japanese courtesy even in defeat, and brought it to her lips. The mess hall seemed to hold its breath. Keiko watched transfixed as Hana took a small, deliberate bite. Hana's face changed instantly. Her eyes widened. Her hand trembled slightly. She chewed slowly, and Keiko saw something she had not seen in months cross Hana's weathered features. Wonder. Hana swallowed. Looked directly at Keiko. Tears formed in the corners of her eyes. Keiko-san, it is not what we thought. It is sweet, warm. It tastes like abundance. The word hung in the air. Abundance. A concept that had died somewhere in the fire bombings, in the starvation, and the propaganda films showing Americans as wasteful demons. But here was Hana, the most practical woman Keiko knew, crying over corn. Lieutenant Maury stood abruptly. Her chair scraped against the floor with a sound like a verdict. Traitor, you betrayed Japanese dignity for barbarian livestock feed. She stormed out of the mess hall, her footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. 4 other women followed her, heads high, refusing to look back. Keiko sat frozen between 2 worlds. Behind her, Lieutenant Maury in the path of rigid resistance. Before her, Hana with tears on her cheeks and the impossible claim that pig food tasted like abundance. Yuki Nakamura and Sachiko Ito, the youngest at just 19, stared at Keiko. Waiting. She was the nurse. She was the daughter of farmers. She was the one who had survived Okinawa. They would follow whatever choice she made. Sachiko was a clerk's assistant, an orphan recruited at 17, terrified of everything. She had barely spoken since their capture. Now her eyes were fixed on Keiko, desperate for guidance. Sergeant Jensen refilled coffee at a nearby table. He was humming something low and American, a tune Keiko did not recognize. He seemed completely unbothered by the drama unfolding 10 feet away. Just doing his job. Just serving food. Just being human. Keiko lifted the corn slowly. It was still warm. The butter had pooled in the kernels, golden and rich. The smell was not unpleasant, sweet, smoky from the grill. Nothing like the hard-dried animal feed she remembered from her father's farm. If I take this bite, am I betraying Hiroshi's sacrifice? Am I betraying father's memory? Or am I choosing to survive in a world that makes no sense anymore? She bit down. The kernels burst between her teeth with a sweetness that shocked her. Not the harsh, starchy taste of animal feed. This was tender, almost creamy, with the richness of butter and the subtle char of smoke. The flavor flooded her mouth, complex and warm and completely unexpected. Keiko's eyes closed involuntarily. Her shoulders, which had been rigid for months, dropped slightly. For the first time since Okinawa, since Hiroshi's death, since the surrender that had marked her as a coward, she felt something other than shame and hunger and fear. She felt fed. She took another bite, then another. Around her, Sachiko and Yuki followed her lead tentatively at first, then with growing hunger. Within seconds, their table was eating. Not enthusiastically, not happily, but eating, surviving, choosing life over ideology. At the next table, American soldiers noticed the shift and exchanged small smiles. Not mocking, just relieved. One crisis averted, one small bridge built across an ocean of hatred. Keiko ate both ears of corn. She licked butter from her fingers, propriety abandoned in the face of real food. And as she sat there, stomach fuller than it had been in months, a terrible thought crept into her mind. If they lied about corn, what else was a lie? The propaganda films had shown Americans as barbarians who ate like animals. But if corn was not pig food, if it was actually this good, then what about everything else they had been taught? What about the promises that Americans would torture prisoners? What about the warnings that surrender meant death and dishonor? What if the entire war had been built on lies? Keiko looked up and met Sergeant Jensen's eyes across the mess hall. He nodded at her a small acknowledgement and turned back to his work. No judgment, no gloating. Just a farm boy from Iowa who had lost his brother to Japanese bullets and was somehow impossibly trying to keep a promise to his mother about not dying from hate. That night, Keiko lay in her bunk staring at the ceiling. The barracks were clean. The beds had real mattresses. There was electric light and heat, and tomorrow there would be breakfast. More food. More impossible American abundance. In the bunk next to her, Yuki whispered in the darkness, "Keiko-san, do you think they will feed us like this every day?" Keiko thought about the corn, about Sergeant Jensen's broken Japanese, about the butter and the warmth and the sweetness that had shattered everything she thought she knew. "I do not know," she whispered back. "I do not know anything anymore." 2 barracks over, Lieutenant Mori sat alone in the dark. She had not eaten dinner. She would not eat their food. She would not betray her principles. But her stomach growled. And in her pocket, hidden where no one could see, was a piece of cornbread that Hana had wrapped in a napkin and left on Mori's bunk. Mori pulled it out, looked at it in the dim light filtering through the window. It smelled good, sweet, rich, impossible. She took a bite, chewed slowly. The sweetness filled her mouth, the texture soft and warm, everything her starving body craved. She took another bite, and another, and in the privacy of darkness where no one could see, Lieutenant Kazue Mori wept. Not from shame, but from the terrible relief of surrender. The war was over, even if she was the last one to admit it. What Keiko did not know, what none of them knew yet, was that the corn was just the beginning. Tomorrow there would be bacon, crispy, salty, fatty bacon that cost more per pound than most Japanese families earned in a week. There would be eggs and toast and butter and coffee with real cream. There would be an abundance so profound, so casual, so everyday American that it would crack the foundations of everything they believed about their enemy. Because propaganda, it turns out, cannot survive the taste of butter. And hatred has a hard time competing with breakfast. Keiko Tanaka, Imperial Navy nurse, daughter of rice farmers, fiancée of a dead hero, had just taken the first step on a journey that would transform her understanding of enemies of mercy, of what it meant to survive when honor demanded death. She had eaten the corn. Everything else would follow. Keiko had survived naval bombardment, field hospital horrors, and the shame of surrender. But nothing prepared her for what happened when she bit into that corn. It was not the sweetness that shattered her worldview. It was the realization that a single bite had opened a door she could never close again. The door to doubt, to questioning everything. The next morning arrived cold and gray. October in Wisconsin felt like winter to women raised in subtropical climates. Keiko woke at 5:30, her body still operating on military time despite the surrender, despite the capture, despite everything that had stripped away her identity as a soldier and left her simply a prisoner, far from home. Captain Eleanor Hayes had assigned her to kitchen duty. Light work, Hayes had said, her voice holding the patient firmness of a former school teacher who had somehow found herself administering a POW camp for enemy women, peeling potatoes, washing dishes, helping prepare meals for the 150 souls, American and Japanese, who occupied this small corner of Wisconsin farmland. Hayes was 42, gray, already threading through her brown hair, her face lined with the particular exhaustion of someone trying to do the right thing in impossible circumstances. Before the war, she had taught English and history to unruly teenagers in Minnesota. Now she managed prisoners who had been taught she was a demon. Keiko entered the kitchen at 6 in the morning. The warmth hit her first welcome after the pre-dawn cold. Then the smell hit her. Bacon. She stopped in the doorway, frozen by a scent she had never encountered before. Salty, smoky, rich with fat. The aroma filled the kitchen like a physical presence coating everything impossible to ignore. At the massive griddle, Sergeant Jensen and Private Danny Kowalski were cooking what looked like enough meat for a feast day. 30 strips at least, maybe 40, sizzling and popping in their own grease. The fat pooled golden on the griddle surface, and the two men worked with the casual efficiency of people who did this every single day. For breakfast, for prisoners. Keiko felt her worldview tilt again the same way it had tilted yesterday with the corn. In Okinawa, the officers had received one small piece of fish per week if they were lucky. Most days had been rice and pickled vegetables and nothing else. Meat was a memory, a luxury from before the war, something to dream about during the endless, hungry nights. And here were the Americans cooking enough pork to feed a company just for one morning meal. Jensen noticed her standing in the doorway. "Morning, Miss Tanaka. Ever had bacon?" His English was too fast. She caught her name and the word bacon, but little else. She shook her head slowly. "Well, you are about to. Cannot do kitchen duty on an empty stomach." He moved with easy confidence, loading a plate. 3 strips of bacon, crispy and glistening. 2 fried eggs, the yolks bright orange-yellow, cooked in bacon fat. Toast with real butter, not the margarine they had sometimes seen in Okinawa. And a small bowl of something white and creamy that she did not recognize. "Grits," he said, pointing. "Southern thing. My ma says they stick to your ribs." He handed her the plate and a fork. Pointed to a small table in the corner of the kitchen away from the main prep area. "Eat up. We have got a lot of potatoes to peel today." Keiko sat alone with the plate in front of her. The bacon was still crackling, slightly residual heat making tiny sounds like distant gunfire. She stared at it the way she might stare at evidence of a crime, trying to understand what it meant that her enemies ate like this while her people starved. This was more food than an Imperial Navy officer received in a day. More meat than most civilians in Japan had seen in months. And it was breakfast. Just breakfast. Routine. Unremarkable American abundance. She picked up a strip of bacon with her fingers. It was hot enough to hurt slightly. The texture was unlike anything in Japanese cuisine. Crispy on the outside, tender, inside the fat rendered to translucent sweetness. She took a bite. The crunch was audible. The taste was an assault, salt and smoke, and a fatty richness that her starving body recognized immediately as exactly what it needed. Umami flooded her senses, that deep, savory satisfaction that she had not experienced since before Okinawa, before the war, had reduced food to fuel and nothing more. Keiko ate all 3 strips, licked her fingers, then, horrified at herself, wiped her hands on a napkin and stared at the empty plate. Father died hungry. The thought came unbidden. Mother is probably starving in Shizuoka right now. Hiroshi killed himself rather than face dishonor. And I am sitting here eating the enemy's pork, and it is the most delicious thing I have ever tasted. Tears fell onto the empty plate. Silent. Unstoppable. Hana appeared beside her, materializing the way she always did when someone needed maternal comfort without asking for it. Hana was carrying a tray of peeled potatoes, her hands already red from the cold water. She set down the tray and sat. "Keiko-san," Keiko spoke in a whisper in Japanese words tumbling out in confession. "Hana-san, what kind of monster am I? My family is starving, and I am crying over how good bacon tastes. I should be ashamed. I should refuse this food. I should honor their sacrifice by suffering with them." Hana was quiet for a long moment. Then she spoke with the calm wisdom of someone who had already walked through the fire of losing everything and come out the other side. You are not a monster. You are a woman who has been lied to her entire life. The propaganda said Americans are demons, but demons do not cook bacon for their prisoners. Demons do not learn our language. Demons do not have dead brothers they still cry for. She gestured toward Jensen, who was flipping bacon with practiced efficiency, his face showing the same quiet grief Keiko had noticed yesterday. The grief of someone who had lost family and was trying not to let it poison him. Maybe the real dishonor is choosing to die when we could live. Maybe Hiroshi was wrong. Keiko stared at her shocked. You cannot say that. Why not? The war is over. The emperor surrendered. The old rules died with the old Japan. We are in a new world now. Might as well eat the bacon. Hana picked up her potato tray and returned to work, leaving Keiko alone with empty plate and full stomach, and the terrible expanding realization that the propaganda had been wrong about corn, wrong about bacon. How deep did the lies go? Had anything they were taught been true? Keiko was beginning to suspect that the greatest lie was not about food at all. It was about enemies, about who deserved mercy and who did not. That afternoon, Captain Hayes called Keiko to her office. The room was small, but organized filing cabinets lining one wall, a desk covered in paperwork, and a window overlooking the camp yard where American soldiers played an impromptu football game despite the cold. Hayes gestured for Keiko to sit. Tanaka-san, I have a proposal. We are getting Red Cross letters through, letters from Japan. Would you help translate for the other women? Keiko blinked. You are helping us contact our families. Geneva Convention requires it. But also, yes, because it is the right thing to do. The words were simple, straightforward, and they made no sense in Keiko's understanding of how enemies treated each other. The right thing to do, not strategy, not manipulation, just rightness as a principle, as if morality could exist independent of which side you fought for. Keiko nodded slowly. I will help. That evening she translated 47 letters. 47 stories of survival and hunger and loss and fragile hope. Wives writing to husbands they did not know were dead. Mothers asking about daughters. Children requesting news of parents. The accumulated grief of a shattered nation filtered through Keiko's halting English into words the Red Cross could transmit across the Pacific. And then she came to her own letter. The envelope was thin, the paper inside cheaper than anything her mother would have used before the war. Keiko's hands shook as she unfolded it. Dearest Keiko, the Red Cross told me you are alive. I wept with joy for 3 days. Shizuoka is destroyed. The rice paddies are ash. Your father's grave is under rubble. I live in a shelter with 40 other women. We eat rice paste and wild grass. But you are alive. That is all that matters. I know you feel shame for surrendering. I know you think Hiroshi was braver than you. But daughter, he chose death. You chose life, and I need you to come home because I am old and weak and I need my daughter. Your father would want you to live. I want you to live. Please eat. Please be strong. Please come home to me. With all my love, Mother. Keiko read it 3 times. Then she folded it carefully, placed it in her pocket, and walked out of Hayes' office before anyone could see her cry. Permission to live. From Mother. Despite dishonor. Despite shame. Permission to survive. She found Hana and Yuki in the barracks, collapsed into Hana's arms, sobbing with a relief she had not known she was carrying. Yuki sat beside them quietly, holding Keiko's hand, saying nothing because no words were needed. The weight of Hiroshi's death, of her father's sacrifice, of the impossible choice between honor and survival. Her mother had released her from it, had chosen her living daughter over abstract principles. You can come home, her mother had written. And Keiko, for the first time since the surrender, believed that maybe she could. In the next barracks, Lieutenant Mori also received a letter. She read it alone, her face stone, her hands steady. When she finished, she walked outside into the October cold and stood very still for 10 minutes. Her letter had been from her younger sister. Husband died at Okinawa. You were captured there. Did you see him die? I have nothing left. Children starving. No rice. No hope. Come home if you can, or do not. I do not know which is crueler. Mori's hands were shaking when she came back inside, but her face remained impassive, controlled, revealing nothing. Keiko saw it anyway, the hairline cracks spreading through granite. 5 days later, Sergeant Jensen brought a crate of Coca-Cola to the kitchen during afternoon break. The bottles were ice-cold, condensation beating on the glass in the warm kitchen air. 5-minute break, ladies. You have earned it. He set the bottles on the work table with a church key bottle opener. The Japanese women stared. They had heard of Coca-Cola. Propaganda had called it American poison water, symbolic of Western decadence and moral decay. None of them had ever tried it. Private Kowalski, 20 years old with a Chicago Polish immigrant's easy friendliness demonstrated. He popped the cap off a bottle with a practiced flick, raised it in mock salute, and took a long drink. The sound of his satisfaction was theatrical. Ah, best 5 cents in America, ladies. Sachiko Ito, emboldened by 3 days of bacon and cornbread, reached for a bottle. She was 19, the youngest of their group, and she had slowly transformed from terrified girl to curious explorer of this strange American world. She opened the bottle with Kowalski's help and took a careful sip. Her eyes went wide. She made a small, surprised sound. Then she laughed. It tickles my nose, the carbonation, the bubbles, the sensation of fizz was completely foreign. Japanese cuisine had nothing like it. The other women, hearing Sachiko's laughter, reached for bottles. Within moments, they were all drinking, all reacting with various degrees of surprise and delight to this bizarre sweetness that somehow tasted like caramel and vanilla, and something indefinable that was purely American. Keiko drank hers slowly, letting the cold sweetness fill her mouth. The bubbles popped against her tongue. The sugar hit her system like a small electrical shock energy she had forgotten the body could produce from something as simple as a drink. In Japan, we are eating grass. Here, prisoners drink fizzy sugar water with ice. How did we ever think we could win this war? Jensen sat down at their table, breaking the invisible officer-prisoner barrier with typical American informality. He had a Coke of his own already half finished. You know what Coca-Cola means in America? The women shook their heads. It means we made it. Depression is over. War is won. We have enough sugar to make fizzy drinks just for fun. That is America. We have enough to share. He paused, took another drink. Even with folks who shot at us yesterday. The words were not accusatory, just factual. A statement of something impossible and true. Keiko set down her Coke, met his eyes directly. Your brother, Guadalcanal. Japanese soldier killed him. The table went silent. Jensen's jaw tightened. Yuki looked terrified. Sachiko seemed ready to run, but Keiko held his gaze, refusing to look away from the truth between them. Yeah, Jensen said quietly. I am sorry. The words were simple. The first time she had apologized to an American. The first time she had seen them as people with losses that mattered, families that grieved, hearts that broke the same way Japanese hearts broke. Jensen was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. Me too. For your fiancé, your dad, this whole damn war. The silence stretched, not uncomfortable. Just heavy with all the things that could not be said, all the grief that belonged to both sides, all the waste that war represented when you stripped away the propaganda and the flags and the noble causes. Jensen stood, tipped his cap at them. Back to work, ladies. Potatoes will not peel themselves. But something had shifted, fundamentally, irreversibly. That Sunday, the Americans organized a baseball game. They invited the POWs to watch. The Japanese women were confused. None had ever seen baseball. The Americans insisted with enthusiastic incomprehensibility. It is American culture. You have got to see. The game was chaos. Kowalski pitched with wild inaccuracy. Jensen batted with grim determination. The other soldiers shouted encouragement and insults in equal measure, their camaraderie loud and profane and utterly foreign to women raised in rigid military hierarchy. The Americans tried to explain the rules to their audience. So you hit the ball and run to the base, and why? Because that is how you score, but why is it fun? It just is. The women started laughing, not at the Americans, with them, at the absurdity of grown men running in circles over a ball, at the joy they took in something so pointless, at the way they celebrated every small victory like it was the end of the war all over again. Jensen hit a home run, jogged around the bases while his teammates mobbed him at home plate. He looked over at the POWs sitting on the bleachers and yelled, grinning. That is how it is done, ladies. Sachiko clapped, then stopped embarrassed. Hana said quietly, it is okay to enjoy it. Keiko watched the Americans celebrate like children. These were not demons. They were boys playing games. How had she ever feared them? After the game, Kowalski approached Sachiko. He was holding a baseball scuffed and grass-stained from the game. He held it out to her. Keep it. Souvenir. First Japanese girl to watch American baseball in Wisconsin. Sachiko took it carefully as if it were made of crystal. Her eyes filled with tears. Thank you, she whispered in English. Her first English words beyond yes and no. Kowalski's face lit up. You are welcome. Now you have got to teach me Japanese. That night, as Sachiko sat on her bunk, holding the baseball, turning it over in her hands. The stitching was red. The leather was worn smooth in places from use. It smelled like grass and dirt and the inexplicable American enthusiasm for games that served no purpose beyond joy. She would carry that baseball across the Pacific and back to Japan. 40 years later, it would sit on her mantle in Tokyo, a reminder that enemies could become friends over a game played with a stick and a ball. But first, there was a harvest festival coming, and with it, a confrontation that would tear the POW camp apart. November 1st, Captain Hayes made an announcement at morning assembly. The camp would be hosting a harvest festival on November 10th. Local tradition, community celebration. The POWs were invited. Lieutenant Maury's reaction was immediate and volcanic. She confronted Hayes in front of everyone, her English rough but furious. You want us to celebrate with you? While our families starve, while our country burns. Hayes remained calm, with the patience of a woman who had taught unruly teenagers for 15 years before the war. I want you to eat a warm meal and remember you are human beings. War is over, Lieutenant. You can stop fighting now, never. You are still the enemy. Maury stormed away. 4 women followed her. The hardline faction, the ones who refused to integrate, who ate only rice and vegetables, who maintained the purity of resistance, even as it hollowed them out. The camp divided cleanly. 8 women with Keiko choosing survival and corn and the terrible kindness of the enemy. 4 women with Maury choosing principle and hunger, and the only dignity they had left. Over the next week, Maury sabotaged where she could, spilled milk in the kitchen, broke dishes, whispered to the other POWs at night. They are weakening you with luxury, making you forget Japan, making you betray everyone who died. She targeted Keiko specifically, knowing exactly where to cut deepest. Your fiancé died with honor. You survive by eating pig bacon and drinking sugar water. Shameful. The words found their mark. That night, Keiko could not eat dinner. Her stomach rejected the food. All the progress, all the careful acceptance, shattered by a few words that spoke to the guilt she carried like a stone. Yuki found her later vomiting in the latrine, crying. She does not mean it, Yuki whispered. Yes, she does, Keiko said. And she is right. In his barracks, Jensen wrote a letter to his mother by lamplight. Dear Ma, I am keeping my promise. Treating the Japanese girls right. Some of them are coming round, smiling, eating. One even said sorry about Tommy. But Ma, it is hard. Every time I see their uniforms, I think about that telegram. About Tommy dying alone on some beach. Then I remember your words. Do not die hating. So I cook them bacon, teach them about corn, share cokes, try to see them as people instead of the enemy who killed my brother. I think Tommy would be proud. I hope you are too. Love, Bobby. He folded the letter, sealed it, and sat staring at nothing for a long time. November 10th arrived cold and bright. The harvest festival transformed the camp. Autumn leaves, corn stalks, pumpkins decorated the mess hall. Local Wisconsin families arrived curious and compassionate, not all hateful despite what propaganda might have suggested. The food spread was overwhelming. Roasted corn, cornbread, corn pudding, succotash, apple cider, pumpkin pie, and a massive turkey that Keiko estimated could feed her entire neighborhood in Shizuoka for a week. Keiko's group attended nervous. Maury's group refused. Mrs. Eleanor Peterson was 68, a farm widow whose husband had died the previous spring. Her son had died at Tarawa. She carried that grief in the lines around her eyes, the way her hands shook slightly when she thought no one was watching. She approached Keiko carrying something made of corn husks woven into a doll shape. My husband made these every harvest for 40 years. He died last spring. My son died in the Pacific. Tarawa. She held out the corn dolly to Keiko. You are just a girl far from home. Here. Keiko's voice came out broken. Your son. Japanese killed Mrs. Peterson's eyes filled with tears. Maybe. Probably. I will never know. She paused, holding Keiko's gaze. But you did not kill him. War did, and you are not war. You are just a girl who needs kindness. Keiko accepted the gift with trembling hands, bowed deeply, the formal Japanese bow of profound respect and gratitude. And then she broke down, completely sobbing in a way she had not allowed herself to sob since Hiroshi's death. Mrs. Peterson hugged her, held her while she cried. Two women from opposite sides of the war, both having lost everything, finding in each other a shared humanity that transcended flags and propaganda and all the lies they had been told about who deserved mercy. From the barracks window, Lieutenant Mori watched. She saw Keiko being embraced by an American grandmother whose son had died fighting Japan, saw the comfort, saw the forgiveness, saw everything she had been taught was impossible happening right there in front of her. Mori's face showed conflict, rage, yearning, the terrible exhaustion of maintaining hatred when kindness was freely offered. She was so tired of being strong, so tired of hating. That night, Keiko returned to the barracks still carrying the corn dolly. Mori was waiting. Ambush, you disgrace us all. Hugged by the enemy, eating their food, laughing at their games. Have you forgotten who you are? Keiko turned to face her. For the first time since their capture, she felt no fear, no shame, just clarity. No, I have remembered. I am Keiko Tanaka, daughter of rice farmers, nurse, survivor, and I am alive. You know what I have not forgotten. Mori-san, the soldiers I watched die in Okinawa. The screams, the burns, the boys crying for their mothers. I have not forgotten Hiroshi. But I have realized something. He was wrong. Dying was not honorable. It was wasteful. He could have lived, could have helped rebuild Japan. Instead, he chose death because he was afraid of shame. Well, I am done with shame. I am going to eat the bacon, drink the Coca-Cola, learn about baseball, and when I go home to my mother, I am going to live. Mori slapped her. The sound echoed in the barracks, a traditional response to dishonor, sharp and meant to hurt. But Mori's hand was trembling. Her eyes were wet. Keiko did not flinch. You can hit me all you want. It will not change the truth. The war is over. Japan lost. And these Americans, the demons we were taught to fear, are feeding us better than our own officers ever did. Mori turned and left without another word. That night, Keiko slept soundly for the first time since Hiroshi's death. Dreamless. Complete. But in the next barracks, Lieutenant Kazue Mori sat alone in the dark with a piece of cornbread hidden in her pocket. The cornbread Hannah had left for her days ago. The cornbread she had told herself she would never eat. She pulled it out, looked at it in the dim light filtering through the window. It smelled good, sweet, rich, impossible. She took a bite, chewed slowly, swallowed, and whispered to the empty barracks, "Forgive me, I am so hungry." Then she ate the rest, every crumb, and wept not from shame, but from relief. The war was over, even if she was the last one to surrender. December 1945. Camp McCoy prepared to close its Japanese POW section. The women would sail home to a ruined nation. But something unexpected happened in those final weeks. Something that proved even the hardest heart can soften when it is starving for kindness. 2 in the morning. Keiko woke to the sound of soft crying from the bathroom at the end of the barracks. She lay still for a moment listening. The sound was muffled, deliberate, someone trying very hard not to be heard. She recognized the rhythm of it, the particular cadence of shame trying to hide itself. She got up quietly and walked down the cold hallway. Lieutenant Mori sat on the bathroom floor back against the wall eating cornbread. Tears streamed down her face as she chewed. The piece was small, already half gone, and her hands shook as she brought it to her mouth again and again, like she could not stop herself, even though each bite was an admission of defeat. Keiko sat down beside her on the cold tile, said nothing, pulled a handkerchief from her pocket and held it out. Mori took it, pressed it to her eyes. The crying continued, quieter now, but no less intense. The silence stretched for 5 minutes. 10. Keiko waited with the patience she had learned in hospital wards, the understanding that sometimes healing required nothing but presence. Finally, Mori spoke. Her voice was raw, broken into pieces. "I was so hungry. I tried to resist. I swore I would only eat rice. But the cornbread smelled so good, and I am so tired. And I could not. More sobbing. The cornbread sat in her lap, three-quarters eaten, evidence of capitulation. Keiko kept her voice gentle. It is just food, Mori-san. It does not make you less Japanese to eat it. Mori looked at her with red, devastated eyes. My husband died at Okinawa, where you were captured. Did you see him die? I saw hundreds die. Maybe I saw him. Maybe I tried to save him. I do not know. I wanted to die too. When I heard, but I was already captured, so I tried to die through starvation instead. Refusing their food, refusing their mercy. She paused, staring at the cornbread. But I am still alive, and I am so ashamed. Keiko chose her words carefully, knowing they carried the weight of transformation. Shame is what they taught us to feel. Honor in death, shame in survival. But what if they were wrong? What if staying alive to rebuild Japan is the real honor? Mori looked at her for a long time. How do you forgive them for your father, your fiancé? I do not know if I have forgiven, but I have stopped hating. Because hate is exhausting. And these Americans, they are not demons. They are just farmers who lost brothers, mothers who lost sons, same as us. Mori finished the cornbread, wiped her face with the handkerchief, stood up slowly, joints stiff from sitting on cold tile. I do not know if I can do what you have done, but I am tired of being the only one still fighting. She walked back to her bunk without another word. But the next morning she appeared in Captain Hayes's office. Hayes looked up from her paperwork, surprised. Lieutenant Mori, what can I do for you? Mori stood at attention, military bearing intact despite everything. Captain Hayes, I would like to help in kitchen, if position is available. Hayes's face softened. Position is always available for those who want to work. Welcome, Lieutenant. In the hallway afterward, Mori passed Sergeant Jensen. She stopped, forced herself to meet his eyes. The words came out stiff, formal, each one costing her something. Sergeant Jensen, your cooking is acceptable. Jensen grinned, recognizing the enormous effort behind those few words. High praise from you, ma'am. I will take it. That afternoon, Jensen taught Mori how to make cornbread. He walked her through each step with patient detail. Cornmeal, eggs, buttermilk, a touch of sugar, baking powder. Mix until just combined. Pour into a greased pan. Bake until golden. My ma's recipe. Passed down 3 generations. Now you are part of the tradition. Mori mixed the batter in silence, her movements precise and controlled. When she poured it into the pan, her hands were steady. But as she slid it into the oven and the smell began to fill the kitchen, she whispered something in Japanese too quiet for Jensen to hear. Husband, forgive me. I am learning to make the enemy's bread. But maybe if I survive, I can teach our son's widow how to make it too. So something good comes from this war. December 10th. The transfer orders were posted on the barracks bulletin board. All Japanese POWs would leave for California on December 20th. From there, they would sail home, arriving in Japan by late January. The news created a strange mixture of emotions. Relief at going home to families. Anxiety about the Japan they would find destroyed and starving and occupied by the very Americans who were now feeding them cornbread. And something else, something none of them wanted to name. Sadness. At leaving the safety, the abundance, the strange unexpected kindness. Keiko stood looking at the notice and realized with a shock that she was going to miss the corn, the bacon, the Coca-Cola, these Americans who had become something other than enemies, something she had no word for. Yuki appeared beside her. We should thank them. Properly. Japanese style, Keiko nodded. Yes, we owe them that much, Yuki smiled. I have been practicing my English. I want to tell Private Kowalski thank you myself for making me laugh when I thought I would never laugh again. The idea took root quickly. Over the next 3 days, the women organized. They made origami paper cranes from newspaper, folding the cheap paper into symbols of peace with the careful precision that only Japanese hands could achieve. Hundreds of cranes strung on thread decorating the mess hall in cascades of white and gray newsprint transformed into beauty. Keiko wrote a speech. Her English was still rough, full of grammatical errors and awkward phrasing. Captain Hayes helped her, correcting, gently preserving Keiko's voice while making the words comprehensible. They invited all the American camp staff. Soldiers, cooks, administrators, medical personnel, everyone who had touched their lives in the 3 months since their arrival. December 15th, the ceremony. 12 Japanese women stood in a line in front of the mess hall under the paper cranes they had folded. 30 Americans sat in chairs watching with curious, cautious faces, not knowing what to expect. Keiko stepped forward, unfolded the paper with her speech written in careful English. Her hands shook. Her voice was quiet at first, then grew stronger. Captain Hayes, Sergeant Jensen, Private Kowalski, all American friends. We came as enemies. We expected cruelty. You gave us kindness. We expected torture. You gave us bacon for breakfast. We expected demons. We found farmers and brothers and mothers. You taught us that corn is not pig food. You taught us that enemies can share Coca-Cola. You taught us that baseball is joy. You taught us that America is not the place our propaganda described. We returned to Japan with full stomachs and confused hearts because we were taught to hate you, but you made it impossible. Thank you for the corn. Thank you for the mercy. Thank you for teaching us that humanity survives war. We will remember. Arigatou gozaimasu. All 12 women bowed together. Deep formal Japanese bows held for 10 full seconds. The bow of profound respect and gratitude. The bow reserved for teachers and parents and those to whom you owe debts that can never be repaid. Silence filled the mess hall. Then Sergeant Jensen stood. His eyes were wet. He walked to the front and bowed back, awkward and American, but completely sincere. You are welcome. And thank you for giving me a chance to keep a promise to my ma, to not die hating. Mrs. Peterson, attending as a guest, stood and hugged at Hannah. The two women, both widows, both mothers, held each other and cried. Captain Hayes embraced Keiko. Thank you for helping with the letters, for building this bridge. Private Kowalski hugged Sachiko, who still clutched the baseball he had given her weeks before. You take care of that, he said. Evidence that we were friends once. Yuki approached Kowalski, her English careful and practiced. Thank you, Private Kowalski, for teaching me that laughter is not betrayal, for showing me that joy can exist even in sadness. Kowalski wiped his eyes. You are welcome, Miss Nakamura. You take care of yourself. You hear the Americans and Japanese mingled, crying and laughing and speaking in broken fragments of each other's languages. Former enemies. Now what friends seem too simple? Humans seem closer to the truth. If your father or grandfather served in World War II, or if you remember those years, tell us in the comments what American food meant to your family. We would love to hear your stories. December 20th arrived too quickly. The buses idled in the cold morning air, exhaust rising like ghosts. The women boarded slowly, carrying small bags with their few possessions. Allowed one bag each. Keiko's contained the corn dolly from Mrs. Peterson, her mother's letter, and the clothes on her back. Jensen found her before she boarded. He was carrying a cloth bundle tied with string. He held it out to her. Inside, she found dried corn kernels, sweet corn, the seeds from his family's farm, 2 pounds of cornmeal in a paper sack, recipe cards handwritten in his mother's careful script, cornbread, corn chowder, grits, and a photograph of an Iowa farm, endless fields stretching to the horizon under a massive sky. Will not last forever, but something to remember us by. Keiko accepted the bundle like it was made of gold, bowed deeply. In broken English, she said, you teach me corn not pig food. You teach me enemy can be kind. I not forget. Jensen smiled, sad and genuine. We will not forget you either, Keiko. Lieutenant Mori was the last to board, but instead of boarding immediately, she turned to face the assembled Americans. 30 soldiers and staff members watched as she stood at attention one final time. She bowed, not stiffly, not with reluctance, but with the deep formal bow reserved for sensei, for teachers, for those who had saved your life. When she straightened, her voice carried across the cold morning air. Clear, deliberate. In English, carefully practiced for this moment. Sergeant Jensen, Captain Hayes, all Americans. You could have punished us. You fed us instead. You could have hated us. You showed mercy instead. You taught me that surrender is not the end of honor. It is the beginning of wisdom. She paused. Her voice cracked slightly. Thank you for the corn. Thank you for teaching me how to live. Jensen stepped forward, bowed back. You taught us too, Lieutenant. That enemies are just people who have not shared a meal yet. Mori smiled, the first genuine smile anyone had seen from her in 4 months. Then she boarded the bus. Mori sat next to Keiko. As the bus pulled away, she whispered in Japanese, "I was wrong about many things, but not about one thing. We are still Japanese, and we will make Japan great again, just differently than before." The women waved from the windows. The Americans waved back. The buses disappeared down the Wisconsin road carrying 12 Japanese women toward California, toward ships, toward home. The California embarkation camp was larger, more impersonal, processing hundreds of POWs from camps across the country, but Keiko and her group carried Wisconsin with them. The memories of corn and bacon and unexpected mercy. On the ship crossing, Keiko shared the cornbread recipe with other POWs, women from camps that had not been like McCoy, women who had been treated harshly, who had faced real cruelty, who looked at Keiko's stories with disbelief bordering on anger. "You were lucky," one woman said bitterly. "My camp, they beat us, starved us. Your Americans were not real Americans." Keiko thought about that. Maybe she had been lucky. Maybe Jensen and Hayes and Kowalski were exceptions. But they had existed. They had been real. And that mattered. January 28, 1946, Yokohama Port. The devastation was beyond anything propaganda had prepared them for. The city was rubble and ash and skeletal buildings. The people on the docks were thin, hollow-eyed, moving with the exhausted shuffle of the chronically hungry. This was the Japan they had fought for. This was what remained. Keiko's mother waited at the dock, 70 years old, aged 20 years in the 8 months since Keiko had last seen her, frail and bent, and still alive. They embraced in silence. No words adequate. Just the fact of survival, of reunion, of both being alive when so many were not. "You came home," her mother whispered. "That is all I needed." The years that followed were hard, rebuilding the farm from ash, restoring the rice paddies, learning to live in occupied Japan under American rule, the strange inversion of having the enemy become administrators and aid workers. The Americans brought food, wheat flour, canned goods, and corn. Corn for a starving nation. The same corn the Japanese had once considered pig food was now keeping them alive. The irony was not lost on Keiko. She taught her neighbors how to prepare it. Grilled with salt, boiled in soup, ground into meal for bread. "It is not pig food," she told them. "Americans taught me. You can eat it." They resisted at first. Pride and propaganda die hard, but hunger is stronger than pride. And eventually they learned. In the spring of 1948, Keiko planted Jensen's corn seeds in a small plot beside the rice paddies. Her neighbors were skeptical. "Corn will not grow in Japan. Wrong climate." Keiko planted them anyway. American corn, American abundance. A test of whether mercy could cross the Pacific. Against all odds, some of the seeds took. The hybrid variety adapted, struggled, survived. The stalks were smaller than Wisconsin corn. The ears were half the size. But they were real. They were corn. When harvest came, she picked 20 ears, grilled them with butter she had saved for weeks, shared them with her neighbors. The reactions were the same as hers had been in Wisconsin. Surprise, delight, the realization that they had been wrong about something fundamental. Word spread, American corn grown by the woman POW who learned kindness. Local curiosity became regional novelty. Newspapers wrote about it, a small story in a devastated nation, but a story of hope. In 1950, Keiko wrote a letter. She addressed it to Sergeant Robert Jensen, care of Camp McCoy, Wisconsin, hoping the mail would forward. "Dear Sergeant Jensen, your corn grew in Japan, small but real. I'm a teacher now. I teach children English and American culture. I tell them America and Japan were enemies. Now we can be friends. Thank you for showing me peace tastes like corn. Respectfully, Keiko Tanaka." 3 months later, a reply arrived. The envelope was thick, containing multiple pages. "Dear Keiko, your letter made my ma cry happy tears. She says you are proof war does not have to last forever. I married a girl from Iowa. We have a daughter now. Named her Grace. Grace for the mercy we showed. Grace for the peace we found. We are planting extra corn this year in honor of the seeds that made it to Japan." Your friend Bobby Jensen Keiko read the letter to her mother, who smiled for the first time since Keiko's return. "Write back. Tell him you are getting married too." Keiko had gotten married 6 months earlier. To Takeshi Yamada, a local teacher, a widower, a gentle man who asked nothing about the war and accepted her silences as part of who she was. No dramatic love, just companionship, rebuilding together. They planted corn together every spring. A small plot, never more than a few rows, but a tradition, a reminder. The decades passed, Japan rebuilt. The economy boomed. The alliance with America became the foundation of Pacific stability. The war became history, then memory, then something the young people learned about in textbooks. Keiko became a respected English teacher at Shizuoka High School. In 1975, at age 56, she was teaching a class of teenagers who had been born 20 years after the war ended. To them, the conflict was ancient history, incomprehensible. A student raised her hand. Tanaka-sensei, why do you love America so much? Keiko thought about the question. Set down her chalk. I do not love America. I love what America showed me. That enemies can become friends. That abundance is meant to be shared. That mercy is stronger than revenge. I was a prisoner of war. I expected torture. I received corn bacon, Coca-Cola, and kindness. That changed everything. The student frowned. But they were the enemy. Yes. And then they gave us corn, and everything changed. In 1985, Keiko received an invitation. Camp McCoy World War II reunion. POWs and veterans of welcome. 40 years had passed. She was 66 gray, her husband recently deceased. Her children grown. Her grandchildren asking questions about a war that seemed impossibly distant. She hesitated. Japan was prosperous now. America was an ally. Did she need to revisit? But curiosity won. Gratitude won. The need for closure won. She went. September 1985, Iowa. Jensen's family farm. Keiko rented a car, drove through endless cornfields to the address on the invitation. The farmhouse was old, well-maintained, surrounded by fields that stretched to the horizon exactly like the photograph Jensen had given her 40 years before. She knocked on the door. Her heart was pounding. Bobby Jensen opened it. 68 years old, gray hair, weathered face, the same kind eyes. Keiko Sergeant Jensen. Just Bobby now. They hugged, cried, laughed at themselves for crying. He walked her through his cornfield. Autumn, golden, endless, picked an ear of sweet corn freshly harvested and handed it to her. Want to try? She bit into it raw. The sweetness was the same. The milk that burst from the kernels was the same. 40 years collapsed into nothing. Still delicious. Still means peace. They walked slowly through the corn, two old people who had been young enemies once. Your mother died in 78, but I told her about your letters. She was so proud I kept my promise. Hiroshi, my fiancé, I forgave him for choosing death. He thought it was honor, but he was just scared. Tommy, my brother, I forgave the war. Took me decades, but I got there. They stood in silence. The corn rustled around them. An American flag and a Japanese flag stood side by side at the edge of the field, Bobby's idea planted there for her visit. We survived, Keiko said. The war, the hate, the propaganda. We survived. We did. And we are still here, eating corn. What does the American spirit mean to you? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if this story moved you, subscribe for more true stories of American values triumphing over hatred. God bless America. And God bless those who chose peace. Keiko Tanaka planted those Wisconsin corn seeds every spring until she died in 1998 at age 79. Her grandchildren still grow them in Shizuoka. They call it peace corn. And every harvest they remember that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness outlive empires. Lieutenant Kazue Mori returned to Japan, became a school teacher, taught reconciliation instead of revenge. She died in 2001, still making cornbread from Sergeant Jensen's recipe, still telling her students that shame had nearly killed her, but cornbread had saved her life. Hana Yoshida, reunited with her children, lived to see them graduate university prosper in the new Japan. She told them the story of the bacon and how an American soldier with a dead brother had shown her that survival was not betrayal. She died peacefully in 1989, surrounded by grandchildren who never knew hunger. Sachiko Ito kept that baseball on her mantle until her death in 2015. She never married, but she taught thousands of Japanese students about American culture, about the day a Chicago boy handed her a ball and called her a friend. She died holding that baseball smiling. Yuki Nakamura returned to Tokyo, married an American occupation officer in 1947 and moved to California. She became a translator for the State Department during the Korean War, using her unique perspective to bridge cultures. She visited Keiko in Japan 3 times before her death in 1995. At her funeral, her children found a faded Coca-Cola bottle cap in her jewelry box, a souvenir from Wisconsin, a reminder of the day she learned enemies could laugh together. Private Danny Kowalski returned to Chicago, worked in his father's restaurant, and never forgot the Japanese girl who had been terrified of a baseball. He kept a photo from the camp on his wall until he died in 1987. His children donated it to the Camp McCoy Museum. The caption read, "The day we stopped being enemies." Captain Eleanor Hayes continued working with refugee resettlement after the war, applying the lessons she learned at Camp McCoy to helping displaced persons across Europe. She never forgot the 12 Japanese women who taught her that mercy was not weakness. She died in 1979, her obituary noting her as a woman who chose kindness when cruelty would have been easier. Sergeant Bobby Jensen farmed corn until age 80, died in 2002. His daughter Grace, named for the mercy her father had shown, scattered his ashes in the cornfield where he had taught a Japanese POW about abundance and forgiveness. The corn, the bacon, the Coca-Cola, the baseball, these were not just cultural symbols. They were weapons of peace, proof that American values generosity, dignity, and kindness could transform enemies into friends. This is a true story based on documented accounts of Japanese POWs calling American corn pig food before their first bite. It is a story about how peace does not begin with treaties. It begins with sharing a meal. And sometimes the greatest victory is not on the battlefield. It is in the kitchen where former enemies learn to make cornbread together. This is the power of the American spirit. This is why we remain the beacon of hope. Not because we won the war, but because we won the peace. Share this story. Remember the greatest generation. Honor those who chose mercy over revenge. And next time you eat corn on the cob, remember Keiko. Remember Bobby. Remember that food can change the world. What does the American spirit mean to you? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe for more stories of how American values transform the world. God bless.